email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with MJ Clark, Vice President at Integrated Leadership Systems and author of Leading Through Listening. We pick up the discussion with MJ explaining her ABC model, activating event, belief system, and consequences, and how leaders can use it to help change unhelpful emotional reactions.
Sure. Yeah, it's a model of cognitive behavioral psychology. So cognitive is what we think, and behavioral is what we do. And it's a model developed by a psychologist named Albert Ellis that I believe he produced in the mid-1960s, and it's been re-researched a multitude of times by other researchers, and it's been found to be the most productive way for people to create change in themselves, and I would argue in other people as well, if you are mentoring and developing others. So the activating event is something that happens outside of us, something that happens out in the world. Usually things that we can't control, they happen to us. And it's usually for purposes of the explanation of the model, it's something that gives us a negative emotion of some sort. So when you think of the word activating, it's kind of something that triggers us negatively. The B and C are things that happen within us. Whatever that activating event is, we're taking in through our belief system. And our belief system is made up of all of the experiences that we have had since we were little kids, all the way up to whatever age you are now. So our brain is literally mapping all of those experiences so that it defines for us and only us how the world works, who we are in the world, how our biases are in there based on all of our experiences. If I've been hurt a bunch of times by men, our bias is like all men are terrible. So we have all these biases in there and all of these learnings from all of the experiences that we've had. So we're filtering the activating event through that belief system, and it produces some kind of thought, usually negative if we're being triggered. And so that negative thought leads us to an emotion that is also negative. And I don't talk about it, I don't think, as much in the book, but what comes after our emotional response is dependent behavior. Our behavior is actually dependent on the emotion we're having. So when you go down that pathway, when you have something that triggers you negatively, you're thinking about it in a negative way, your emotion is negative, and now you're behaving in a negative way. So I can give you a quick example. Let's say I wasn't invited to a meeting that I thought I should be at. So I'm not invited to the meeting. That's the activating event. My thought is that colleague does not respect me. It could be about them, or it could be my own insecurity, like we talked about earlier. So a belief about the world or something about me. So maybe it's I don't have good things to say, so they don't want to invite me. Either way. My emotion, if I'm upset that this person doesn't respect me, might be I feel disrespected, I feel confused, I feel alarmed, like I need to be in that meeting and now I'm not. So my behavior, again, depends on my belief system, all of my experiences. So I might do a whole host of things. If I don't get invited, I might shut down. I might avoid that person for the next few days. I might get upset and blast an email to everybody that's in the meeting. I might show up at the meeting and yell and scream. It ranges from super passive to super aggressive. It's all of those things depending on who I am. So the trick to working that model is to think about what you're saying in your head, the belief that you have about that activating event, and stop yourself when you recognize that it's negative and change it, not necessarily to just positive, but sometimes you're changing it to something practical. Let's say that guy never invites you to meetings and you know that you don't like how he behaves, and you have evidence that this is a chronic pattern, you might say, man, that guy doesn't respect me and I know it. Maybe he's told me that, So I have evidence. I still can think about it practically. Even if I can't be like, oh, he must not have meant that. No, he definitely meant to not invite me. So how could I be practical about it? Okay, he's not inviting me. There are other people in the meeting. I'm going to ask somebody else to say in the meeting why I should be there and that they invited me. So I'm going down a different path based on practical thinking instead of negative thinking.
By the way, there's a Dilbert cartoon that talks about this perfectly. So the reason you weren't invited to the
does
meeting,
it?
there's so the pointy hair boss has a big meeting, and Dilbert finds out about it after the meeting is over, and he goes to the pointy hair boss and he says, "Hey, why did you have a meeting about my project without inviting me?" And the pointy hair boss says, "We find things go so much smoother when nobody has any actual knowledge."
I love Dilbert so much.
Yeah, he's
That's
great.
hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times you might get not invited to a meeting for positive reasons. Maybe that person thinks like, you don't need to be here. It's going to be a waste of your time. I mean, there are some positive reasons. I think in our belief system, we often do assume negative things, and we can just as easily assume positive things. So I'd like to stop myself. Like, is this a fact that I know that I'm thinking, or is this an assumption? And if it is an assumption, is it negative?
Right.
Because that will take me down that path every time.
So there's another term you use in the book called cognitive dissonance. So what is that, and how can we use it to help ourselves grow?
So cognitive dissonance is when our reality does not match what our brain thinks. So let's say our brain thinks, dang, I am this super smart person. And the reality is, I didn't go to college, let's say. So my brain is very upset because I think I'm smart, but I don't have evidence in the external world to validate that, to make me feel smart. So our brain is at unrest. And I think when we find, we will do all crazy things with that. We might lie to people and say we've gone to college because we want them to think we're smart. And it's so important to us. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think when we can recognize, okay, I'm lying about this thing, that's a really helpful way to become more self-aware. What is the importance I have here that's causing this behavior because it does not match what I have in my head as part of my self-definition, as the way that I think about myself, it's not matching. So I think it's really important, especially with that. I think people lie pretty regularly, even though they might disagree with me. I think it happens pretty regularly. And that's a good way for people to stop themselves and say, why am I lying right now? Why am I saying something I know isn't true? Can I peel it back and not just think, oh, I'm just being silly or I'm just kidding? I think we laugh things away that are very serious and very, very helpful. If I could journal about things like that, that's going to get me a lot further in understanding where some of these thoughts that are not helpful are coming from. So we want to first acknowledge that there is cognitive dissonance, and then I can make that go away by two things. One is actually making the outside match the inside. So if going to college is going to make me feel smarter and make me more proud of myself, maybe I sign up to go to college. If I don't want to do that, I need to be okay with not having a college degree, and I need to talk to myself about that in much more productive ways.
I think you see that play out a lot in resumes. I mean, resumes have a lot of, if not extrapolated, exaggerations, outright lies on them.
Yes. I mean, some of the industries that I work with regularly will say to me, we hired this person because of their resume and all these things they said they would do, and we're paying them a ton of money, and they show up and they can't do half of those things. And now we're overpaying them. And now what do we do with this guy? Like, we don't really want to fire him because we need somebody in that spot. but we can't really reduce their pay because we gave them an offer letter. So that never used to happen, Clint. I don't know about you, but I think about like you would get fired if you back in the day had a resume that even just said you went to a college that you didn't go to or had a job skill that you didn't have. You were out the door. And now people worry about it and try to think, how do we deal with this? And I always think, boy, you just would be fired, back when I first started to work.
For sure. We had a coach at Georgia Tech who left to go to Notre Dame for football, and his resume was incorrect. He had claimed a college he didn't go to, or there was something, master's program, whatever it was. And so within 3 days, he was out of a job because they let him go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's such a great example of how we lie. And we're overinflated sometimes in our heads. So we just start to believe the things that we've tried to convince others of all these years.
Right. Now, in the practice that I live in, we strongly advocate for face-to-face planning sessions where we actually bring the team together. Even if it's a global project, we'll bring them all together, put them in the same room. We just did this last week in Dallas for a client. And you give a great explanation of why that's a good thing to do, because you wrote face-to-face difficult conversations lead to trust and avoidance leads to mistrust. And that's really the purpose of having people face-to-face in a planning session is to establish a relationship between us that doesn't exist as, you get deeper relationships when you're person to person than even if you're on Teams call or Zoom, it's not the same. And you don't have those, it's a lot harder to have difficult conversations remotely or virtually than it is to have them face to face.
I agree. I don't know if you felt this, but during COVID, when everything went online, I remember days where I would have a normally full day where I would coach people all day. And at the end of the day, I felt just completely drained. And I thought, when I meet with people in person all day, like the exact same schedule, I don't at all feel emotionally drained. I'm kind of excited and charged up. And I am an extrovert, so I do get energy from people. But that's what I recognized that was missing was really the energy. Because you can still see body language, you can still see facial expressions, but it's that energy. And I think to your point, if you're having a difficult conversation, you can feel the sympathy, you can feel the compassion, you can hear the tone of voice right next to you. You can see their entire body while you're talking to them. It's just a very different experience. I love face-to-face meetings, and I try to have them as often as possible. And I think with our world today, we're often online more than I would prefer. But to be efficient with our time, we often are back-to-back online because we don't have to travel anywhere.
Yeah, there's kind of one of those gold standard books that I've was at least 30 years old, but it was called The Wisdom of Teams. And it was printed by Harvard Press. And the gist of the book was that if you want to create so the question was, how do you take a group of individuals who have been assigned to a team and actually, how do you see teamwork? What comes first, chicken or the egg? And what they found was if you put a structure in place within which people begin to feel accountable to each other, that's when you begin to see teamwork happen. And so part of the getting people face to face is putting that structure in place where I get to put a name with a face, and it's deeper than just an email address, right? And that's really the gist of it is I need to turn you into a person that I feel some kind of connection to. And I learn what you don't learn virtually typically that you will learn face to face is on a coffee break or on a breakfast or a team dinner. You're going to find out, well, you have 2 kids. Well, I have 2 kids, and my kids play this and your kids play that. And so really humanizing you. And that's what's going to start to form the bonds of a relationship. And we have found that you can run projects remotely for 2 years if you make that first week face-to-face. Then you can do everything else remote because of the relationships you establish.
Same way with executive coaching. If I start working with someone new, I always have the first couple of meetings face-to-face for that very reason. It just sets the foundation. And your point a minute ago that was somewhat related to accountability, I think is a big reason for that. It's very hard to tell somebody you didn't do what you said you would do when you are face to face. It's so much easier online or over the phone to just say, hey, I didn't get a chance to do that. But when someone's looking right at you, expecting results from you, I think it makes it much harder to not have things done. So it's built-in accountability.
Especially when you learn that the last time you were late on something, you caused this person pain because they had to work a weekend and miss a big event in their kid's life.
Yes.
Then you put pressure on yourself to make sure that doesn't happen again because you feel obligated now.
Well, and I think so many people that I work with say, well, I can't keep that guy accountable. Like they don't report to me. And I think anybody that you are needing something from or giving something to, you can expect accountability from them. I mean, it's always a tough conversation, but I like to, when that is not working, when I'm not getting what I need, and I've asked a few times, I always say to that person, my next step is to talk with your supervisor, and I invite you to come with me. So I'm essentially saying, I'm not going to say anything to your supervisor that I wouldn't say in front of you.
Yeah.
Please do come, and we'll talk to them together. I'm just not getting what I need. And a lot of times that's when the backpedaling starts, and it's like, oh, let me just give you what you need, you know? But I think that's a very gentle way of keeping someone accountable after you've repeatedly asked and not gotten what you need. You know, you're trying to be assertive, you're trying to handle it yourself, but this is my next step. You're managing their expectations. You're inviting them to be part of it. I mean, I think it's a very, low risk kind of way to take that next step.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do, kind of the predecessor step to, the ace in the hole of I'm going to talk to your supervisor is, so we always ask the person, hey, here's what we're going to do. We think this is yours. Do you agree this is yours? And have them either yes or no. And if the answer is no, we'll find somebody else. If the answer is yes, okay. So here's what I would call it, but it's your task. What would you call it? What's going to make the most sense to you? What would you call this? And so we put in their words, and then we say, look, we know I'm not the only thing you got going on right now. You got multiple projects. You got your boss's favorite thing. You got customer fires. So with all the stuff you have going on, when can you give this to me? I know you're not 100% available, so when can you give it to me? And it may say 2 weeks, and I might think 2 weeks, that should only be like 2 hours. But at the end of the day, they're the one doing the work, and they know their schedule. So what we have found is if you ask them, is this yours, yes or no? What would you call it? How long do you need? And then the fourth thing we ask them is, when can you start? In other words, are you waiting on other people to give you information before you start this? And once we do that, you've removed all the excuses they can hide behind. Then it's theirs. They truly have to own that task. And if they don't, then we can go to the boss and say something, whatever's happening. But we like to do that first because that forces accountability back down on them.
I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's great.
So one of the things we're talking about here is trust, right? Is we're trying to establish trust. And you encourage leaders to start with trust rather than requiring others earn it first. So why does that approach accelerate relationships?
To me, we can start with trust or start with distrust. It's an option either way. So no matter which way we start, we will find out if we can trust that person.
Yeah.
Right? So I always think about, I want to approach it positively. So I'm going to assume that you're going to do what you say you will do. And if not, then I know I can't trust you perhaps, and I'm all for second chances if something crazy came up, but I'm going to find out either way. So I just like to take a positive approach. And I think people appreciate right out of the gate that I'm willing to give you something. Now I don't delegate anything and trust right out of the gate that might take the company down or cost a ton of money. So, it's thoughtful risk. I'm always thinking, okay, like if they totally mess this up or they don't give me what I need, it's not going to cost a bunch of money. It's not going to wreck the whole company. So it's worth it.
In the latter case, it's trust but verify, right? In the first case, it's trust. Because I'm like you, I like to lead with trust. Because yes, it can hurt me, but in general, I find that I'd rather start with a bank full of trust. And I'm often reminded of the Cheers episode from back in the day. If you remember the TV show Cheers, I can't remember the lady's name, but she's the little short lady who plays the bartender. The wait staff. And so this guy comes in and sits down and orders a beer. And he puts $20, he puts like 25 or $4 or $5 bills on the table and goes, this is going to be your tip. And every time you screw something up, I'm going to take some money away. And so she does something wrong and he takes away a $5. And then she does something else wrong, he takes away another $5. And finally she picks up the other $10 gives it to him and pours the beer on top of his head. So this is basically, I'm starting with trust. Here's your tip. And you have to unearn it. So
Right. That's a really good analogy. That's exactly it. Yeah, I think people talk a lot about trust but verify. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. But I think it's not true trust if we trust but verify. I do think follow-up is super important. And I think maybe that's more of what you're alluding to. I mean, we do want to follow up, and I think people get very, very resentful when they think, well, I don't want to babysit somebody. Like, they should just do it. I think, 10 seconds of your time to shoot an email somewhere or drive by asking when you're in the hallway and their office is right there. I feel like that's low-hanging fruit to get what you need. So I'm willing to take those extra steps, even though, I'm expecting it on time, well done.
Right. One of the things we talked about earlier was this, people can be reactive, right? And so when someone receives this constructive feedback defensively, what does that really signal about their leadership maturity?
I would say it signifies that they don't have a high EQ, emotional intelligence. So I think it's very hard to lead with a low EQ. And there are certainly people floating outside that have that exact thing going on. But really, if you think about self-awareness, it is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. It's really where we start understanding ourselves so that we can behave in ways that make us proud of ourselves before we take that to other people and try to have good relationships and have political awareness and those kinds of things that are 2.0, I think of it in emotional intelligence. So I really think people who are reactive, that is actually indicative of the teenage level of adult development. So if you think about teenagers, I always use the analogy from my high school days. When you think, okay, that guy stole my girlfriend, so me and my buddies are going to go TP that guy's house on Friday. That is reactivity. This happened and we're going to do this. They don't think about the B and C in that ABCD model that we spoke of earlier. They're not processing, why did that person leave me? Well, I've been a pretty crummy boyfriend. So, I was initially really mad, but I guess I get it. So I don't need to take my toilet paper over to that guy's house because it's really on me, what do I own of this? And teenagers' brains are not fully developed, which is why they run around like molten lava, emotionally. And there are definitely some adults who have that same thing going on. They're in that teenage level of adult development, and they have never figured out how to engage people well and how to really try to understand themselves better. They just accept who they are and they like who they are, and they're not going to do anything about it.
I think it's the defensiveness that one of the things that kills me is they'll give you a million excuses, and you just want to say, look, and I've had this conversation with my kids. It's like, look, you can disagree with my point, but quit finding excuses. It's actually your fault. Listen, we can talk about why it's your fault. Just own that it's your fault and it won't happen again. But don't give me, well, this happened and that happened, because you're not helping yourself. You could quit being defensive. And that's that level of maturity you're talking about, which I think in the book you say the brain doesn't really finish until you're 25. It's when it really starts to mature.
Yeah, that's when it's finished developing. And really the last piece of that is our decision-making ability. So we will make bonehead decisions up until that stage. And it's fine. When I was raising my kids, I liked to think about, this is age-appropriate behavior. Like, they're 13. Like, of course, they're going bobo because we're not going to the park or whatever, or taking a trip. But I do think it is an epidemic, Clint, people not owning their own mistakes nowadays. And I spend a lot of time in coaching addressing that. And really, self-assessment tools don't help so much, like DISC and Myers-Briggs and things that people fill out themselves. I think when you take a 360 that also, everybody else is evaluating you and you are also evaluating you, then you really see those gaps in self-awareness. you see, they're rating me an 80% on this and I have myself a 20%. That gap is usually behavioral. And there's a lot of research about the fact that we are very poor at assessing our own abilities. And I think we see it when we take a true 360 and we also weigh in. You really see that gap. It's so beneficial, super scary to take those assessments, but incredibly beneficial if you have the courage to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, we've seen the self-assessments are tough because we've had people come to, in the past, we've had assessments on our website, and they would come to the website and fill out the assessment that says they're doing everything perfectly. And I'm thinking, well, then why are you on a project manager website looking for help if you do it perfectly? So something is not jiving here, but people always rate themselves higher than they probably deserve to be.
They do. That's absolutely the trend that researchers have found. You're absolutely right.
So we haven't touched much on the conflict piece, but let's kind of tie that in before we finish up. And
Sure.
There's going to be conflict, and it's we have to do conflict resolution. And listening is probably more difficult or most difficult when you're in conflict because you want to shut down and talk about why you're right. And might makes right. You probably yell more than you, as long as you're louder than the other person. So what separates leaders who escalate conflict from those who de-escalate it? And are there any secrets there?
I think it really starts with emotional intelligence. It starts with you as the leader. Can you understand what you are going through emotionally when you are either the recipient of a tough conversation or you're giving the tough conversation? Either way, we have to understand ourselves. I think one thing I do, besides listening well, which we talked about earlier, is that I tend to lower my volume and I speak a little slower. And I think that way the person knows, like, I'm really calm. I'm going to be very patient here. I'm not going to blow up. Just kind of lowering my volume and speaking a little bit slower, just like this, just kind of takes the room down a notch. So I think that is very helpful. One thing I do that is really from mediation teaching is I like to ask questions because the emotional center of our brain tends to shut down when we're trying to answer a question, and vice versa. Like when we're doing math, the emotional center is shut down because we're trying to think. But when we're emoting, we're not able to do math. We're not able to think clearly. So I always think about that. And if two people, especially when I'm mediating, if two people are arguing, I will be listening for what they're actually saying, and then I will ask a question about what they're saying. The real crux of it, not the name calling and all the other crazy things that come out of their mouth, but like, what do I think you're really getting at? And I'll ask a question, and it usually flips that switch in their brain and they just become calmer because they're trying to answer my question.
Yeah, I saw that in person in a situation. We had a project where these two very strong-willed engineers were just going at it, face to face, nose to nose. I mean, you were waiting for blows to start raining down. And I'm listening to them talk, and then it occurred to me, they're saying the same thing, just in different ways. They're actually not disagreeing. They just don't know it. Because now the emotion is taken over. So I had to step in and go, just let's pause for a minute and making these names up. Joe, I think if I hear you correctly, you're saying this, right? Yes. Fred, you're saying this, right? Aren't they the same thing? Aren't you actually agreeing? And it took a minute because now their feelings are like, no, I have to be right. But then they're like, okay, you're right. We are. But it's so funny. You need to be able to de-escalate, take a step down, to your point, take the emotion out of it and be able to and have some real thought.
I think a lot of times when I am called in because people are in conflict, what I find most frequently is that each person is saying the exact same thing about the other person. And I like to, when I bring them together, like I've interviewed both of them, when I bring them together, I like to tell them that. I like to say all of the things you've said about the other person, that person is also saying about you. And then I just pause and they're both shocked. What? Like, do you think I am that? But it's a nice way to say, like, we're just interpreting things in different ways, but we both feel the same way. So can we move on from there? Can we talk about how to fix this now that we're both on the same page?
I'm not a jerk. You're a jerk. What are you talking about?
Right. Exactly.
So if someone's listening to the podcast today and they really want to become a stronger communicator, where should they start?
I think they should start with themselves. I think self-observation is a really excellent tool that we don't use that much. So when you're talking, when you're communicating, look at people's body language and their facial expressions. To just bring it full circle, it's back to what you said with your wife. Like, she might not know that she's even making these faces. Most of us don't understand our body language, but it's coming directly from our thoughts. So our body betrays us many times. So look at people's body language, at their facial expressions, at their tone of voice, and then journal about those things. This is what I saw. Was I talking too much? How can I evaluate the communication that I'm giving? If I didn't get what I wanted in that instance, was I clear when I gave direction? How could I be more clear? People get very unhappy about what they get as a final product from someone. And I always go to me, like, how did I not explain this very well?
Right.
And that's where you can make change. So I think that's self-analysis and journaling about it to continue to grow is the way to approach it.
So this is a similar question. I do think there's a little bit of difference here, and that is,
Sure.
if somebody listening, they realize that they've been leading mostly by talking instead of listening, what's one practical change they can make tomorrow morning that would immediately improve how they communicate with their team and how the team collaborates?
I think one way is to recognize that communication is a loop. It is not a one-way thing. So I think many of us think, okay, I'm saying this, and so they will do this. I'm communicating clearly. Until you figure out if they have understood it in the way that you meant it, you have not had communication take place. You're telling, but you also need to confirm that in their listening, they got what you said. I'm big on sending follow-up notes. So not detailed notes, but let's say we had a conversation, to send you a quick text or a quick email saying, just so we're on the same page, you said you would do this. I said I would do that. Is that what you understood? I'll say that in the meeting while I'm face to face. But if I don't have time, I'll follow up with some kind of communication like that.
I think it's important. We open this podcast every week with a quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." And
Yes.
when I was researching my second book, I thought communication and conversation were the same thing, but they're actually not. Communication can happen in a one-way, asynchronous situation where you send a text message or post something on Slack or send an email, even just leave somebody a voicemail. But a conversation, by definition, is an oral exchange of information. And the key word there is exchange. Because as you alluded to earlier, when you tell me something, because I talk about this all the time, and if you played the game of telephone when you're a kid, you'll totally get the fact that the message changes, right? But in the business world, that same thing happens where, to your point, a leader says, they say it very clearly because it's clear to them, so it must be clear to you what their intentions are, and yet they're unpleasantly surprised when they don't get the result they wanted. Whereas if you set up the situation where you can ask clarifying questions, and I could say, well, MJ, when you said turn left, do you mean like turn left right now at the McDonald's, the stop sign, the stoplight? What left do you want me to take? Because to you, turn left was quite clear. Clint turned left. But to me, I don't know which left. So if I can ask these clarifying questions, you're going to get a much better result and closer to what you actually wanted. And that's a conversation.
I agree. And it's back to our agreement that face-to-face does work best, because then it is more often a conversation. You can ask those clarifying questions. You can ask if it was understood the way you meant it to be.
And it's a human nature thing as well, MJ, as I'm sure you realize. It's basically what happens as a human being. I want to check things off my to-do list. And the best chance I have of getting that done is if I email you and hope I never hear from you again. Because then it's off my list and you never said no, so I'm okay. But in reality, what you should be doing, and nobody wants to do, is pick up the phone or walk down the hallway and say, hey, here's what I did. Is this right? But the reason we don't do that is because I might not be able to check it off my to-do list. You might come back and say, no, that's not what I want.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head with that. I think we're all basically impatient these days because of all the technology. We get answers immediately. And when we don't, it's a problem. So we want to communicate in the same way. If you don't write back right away, I'm going to assume that it's all good and I'm going to move along.
Yeah, I think it's people going back to even pre-pandemic, people love silos, right? They like to be in their own silos. Maybe I'm just speaking about me because I'm an engineer, but engineers traditionally, stereotypically, even there's a grain of truth here, like to work around people like themselves. They want to go back to their cubicle and design the perfect widget. Don't want to come to what I see as a waste of time meetings. But in reality, what you're doing is you're taking conversation out of it, and technology just enables and exacerbates that. So we have to be able to bring people together to have conversations.
I could not agree more.
So as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask all my guests. Hopefully these won't throw you for a loop.
Okay.
Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
I say to myself throughout the day, let your will be done. I think Jesus Christ is the best leader that we've ever had. So I let him lead me, honestly.
Okay. So what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Wow. I think it came from a very long time ago when I was a secretary at an office, and this person was doing something a little unethical, someone that I was supporting. And our office manager said, this is not about you, and I don't want it to involve you. So we have to have these tough conversations. And she pulled this person in with me, and we went through these things that were really questionable. And so it was the first taste for me of a tough conversation that really stuck with me, the value of it and how it made the situation better when I always feared it would make it worse.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be tough, especially early in your career.
It was scary.
And by the way, that doesn't change, right? Even today, 30 plus years into my career, I still, those tough one-on-one conversations still, I'm like, I don't really want to have this conversation. I have to go do it, but I really don't want to.
None of us do. None of us do.
What is the best book or article you've read recently? What was the key takeaway?
Wow. Recently, I read a lot. I would say a book I go back to a lot is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I love that book. So I am going back to that a lot. Every time I think that my life is terrible, I love to read that book because it's about a person in a concentration camp doing what we talked about with that ABCD model, deciding how to think. And I think that's what gets us the life we want, is recognizing we're in control of our thoughts. So that book has had probably the most profound impact on me. So I would say that, even though I've maybe not recently read it, but I've read it many times.
I'd put that on my to-do list. I haven't read that one.
Oh, it's so good. And it's short. It's really quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
So MJ, this has really been great. I really appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about you or engage with your company, how can they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn, MJ Clark at Integrated Leadership Systems. They can email me, mj@integratedleader.com. And I'm happy to engage with you and clarify anything that you might have heard in this podcast that you're wondering about.
All right. Well, the book is called Leading Through Listening. I highly recommend it. And there's a workbook associated with it as well. MJ, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you, Clint. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.